You're listening to Signals from the Core, a podcast about adventuring in the core sector of the Mongoose Traveler 2nd Edition role-playing game. This is where the bureaucracy is dangerous, the nobles are lethal, and where power, paranoia, and prestige collide. I'm Captain Aurelius, and I'll be your host. In each episode, we explore the tangled heart of the Third Imperium through original story hooks, people of interest, encounters, locations, and the tools you need to bring high-stakes, low-trust campaigns to life. If your crew is headed for the throne world, buckle up, because here in the core, secrets don't stay buried. Not for long. The theme of the episode today builds off episode 10, when we looked at celebrity and fame in the core. And that got me thinking about the kinds of entertainment that people consume here, and of course, across the Third Imperium. Every so often, I think about the ways to play with or depict entertainment here in the core. And honestly, it's a complete rabbit hole of, what entertainment is like here. What is the media? How do people consume media? And before you say, well, wait a minute, what does it really matter? Why would that matter? The type of media people consume or entertainment, how does that factor into my games, Captain? Well, I'm glad you asked. We're going to get to it. We'll get into the types of entertainment and how it's consumed, and in terms of even the technology and devices that are used to consume it, all that. But first, before we get started, if you'd like to share thoughts with me on the show, or any of your ideas for it, drop me a line at coresignalsmail@gmail.com, or follow me at signalsfromthecore.bsky.social over on Blue Sky. Both of these addresses are in the show notes. And please, don't forget to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I know I say it every time I drop a show, but honestly, it really does help. And if you enjoy the show and you want to see it, stick around and have more episodes out. Just help give it a little boost. I promise you, it's not for my ego. It's just mainly for my sanity. I would like to see the show grow. It has been growing steadily. I would like to see it continue to grow, because it makes doing it worth doing all that much more. I don't know. You get my point, hopefully. So I guess today I'm inviting you down, like I said, a bit of a rabbit hole with me, because as I started exploring all of this, it took me on a journey, and it led me, funnily enough, it led me to a couple of planets I want to look into today too. And one of them sounded really familiar to me, and that's Alekvadin. And I was like, why do I know this? Why do I know this system? Why does this sound so familiar? Why do I know this planet's name? So I was kind of rooting around, and I realized that planet factors into, not heavily, but it's mentioned and kind of plays a role, in Core Adventure 1, Invasive Species. And so I thought, well, wow, there's a connection there. And I've talked briefly about those three Core Adventure modules that Christopher Griffen has written. So I thought, hey, why don't I just go ahead and review Invasive Species as well? Because tangentially, it's kind of related to the entertainment theme too, as you'll see when we get into the review. In a nutshell, it brings your travelers on a mission, sort of an entertainment style mission, basically. For a noble, basically to go on a safari. So we'll get into that. Anyway, I guess it's a bit of a roller coaster today on Signals from the Core. I hope you enjoy it. And again, let me know on socials. Let me know kind of wherever you are, what you think of the episode. Drop me a line in email. Always happy to receive email and all of your thoughts. So stick around. I think we got an exciting show here for you today, and I'm excited to bring it to you. When we think about entertainment in Traveler, in here in the core, there are a few different ways we can approach it or come at it. We have the media standpoint, which is important and has a place in my games, which I'll touch on. But it also has to do with the type of entertainment that we can glean from reading some of the source material, which we already described to a certain degree in episode 10. But what do I mean by that? Well, we get a lot of gambling described, a lot of experiential sort of entertainment described. We have people going on safaris, large spectacles and reenactments of famous battles have been described or at least mentioned. Museums are frequently called out, especially on Capitol. I sort of think about these things as tributes to the way things used to be. History and life and experiences tend to feel popular across the Third Imperium. And so that led me to thinking of this framework, because like a lot of things in life, it all comes down to the haves and have-nots, right? At least that's the way I sort of cast it in my brain. And the way I sort of thought about it was people without means watch standard holo-vids when they can get a hold of them, right? People with middle means probably have VR suites and take advantage of immersive media. And then people with many means, they're the ones who go and do and see things for themselves, right? That experience nature that we've heard so much about. We've heard about it in Singularity. We hear about it in the Third Imperium source book. People going and doing things. And in some ways, the way I sort of rationalize it is, this is why safari ships exist. I mean, there's a whole class of ship for taking people on safaris when you think about it. So that's a thing here in Charted Space, particularly in the core, where there is a larger concentration of people of means, you would expect. So what does this look like? Well, holo-vids we probably won't spend a lot of time on. They sort of speak for themselves, right? People either grab them from a data feed subscription or get their hands on physical media and watch on their local decks or tablets. It's kind of similar to how it works here in our reality, just a little more advanced in some areas, or on some places not. It probably works exactly like it works here. And these range from standard holographics and videos to middle grade tri-D tech or higher graphics and what I call simulated sensory elements that stop just short of being truly immersive. Therefore, your standard kind of passive viewing across the Imperium include, like I said, holographics, news nets, basic interactive multimedia programs. Then you have I was looking at the Central Supply catalog to sort of give me some ideas as well. And that gives us a look at some standard games and popular hobby gear too, outside of the things I was just talking about. You have this holographic play table on page 83, listed at tech level 9, functions as a normal surface until you activate it, at which point generates interactive holographic playing pieces pre-installed with popular games like Front Loader, Offbeat, Jump, Dimension, some of the ones listed. It's an excellent space-saving way for a crew to socialize, but for people to just sort of distract themselves, right? And captures that holographic space chess trope that we see in popular science fiction. Sort of it probably goes without mentioning, but the scene with R2 and Chewbacca in the original Star Wars on the Millennium Falcon. Sorry to any of you I've turned off by evoking Star Wars here on a Traveler podcast, but it springs to mind, right, when you look at this holographic play table in the Central Supply catalog. Then there's a game called Lords of Space on page 84 that's listed at a tech level 10. It's this massive collecting craze in the game, consisting of 30 centimeter tall animatronic action figures programmed to react to one another. And they represent different alien species, careers, and notable personalities. And they're collectibles, right? So you've got one that's like this sought after Aslan assassin. They're just, toys. They have no practical purpose unless you trade them or sell them to collectors. So that's a little bit of a story seed there. If one of your players sort of has this as one of their hobbies or things that they like to do, keep that in mind. You could come back and bring that into play later. We'll get into methodologies for doing that later on in the show. But this was one of the things that sort of stuck out to me, that I was like, oh, this would be a great flavor add to the game, a collectible. And it, just adds texture to the universe, showing that, even rugged spacefaring ne'er-do-wells can get swept up in a toy collecting fad. Or try to make a buck on it if they come across it on their travels and they know there's a collector on a starport somewhere that they can always bring it back and make some credits off that. And of course, you've got this miniatures war game also on page 84 across various tech levels from 1, anywhere from 1 to 11. And it's just a tabletop hobby where players field armies against one another using naval or military tactics skill to determine the winner. Just another recreational hobby. But I thought that was interesting because through this, we can kind of extrapolate the sorts of entertainment profiles that are at play here, what people value in their entertainment, right? Then for those with the middle means, that second tier, well, the catalog gives us a bunch of cool options here too. And we get a bunch of media, entertainment, hobby gear to play with and think about content for. A lot of these are the audio and visual media gear. So we've got a home theater on page 84 as well, from tech levels 8, 9, all the way to 11. These are described as a system for watching vids that evolves significantly as the technology improves. So at tech level 8, you've got flat screens and surround sound. Tech level 9, use screens that can be painted or pasted onto walls. And then at tech level 11, you get into 3D or holographic projection to place the viewer in the middle of the action. And, the idea is as the technology advances, you have this fully immersive, room-sized, holographic movie experience which is just a fantastic sci-fi concept to play with and kind of think about the content for. Similarly, you get into that, one step above that, you get holographic wallpaper, also on page 84. Tech level 12, it's a wall coating that turns the room into a window overlooking a dynamic holographic scene, right? And then you pair it with a home theater. You've got this environmental replicator music system, and it transforms a standard room into an immersive world or scene or performance, which I just thought was fascinating and something that you could keep in mind, as this highly atmospheric item that allows for, incredible personalization for either the traveler's space or, somebody that the traveler is working for. You could just set a scene there where somebody's just kind of sitting in their room, immersed in this whole kind of, entertainment like scene. Then you've got this high fidelity music system on page 83 from tech level 6 and 11 are listed. These are systems providing perfect sound reproduction. At the basic TL6, it's incredibly convincing, but the advanced TL11 version features directional sound output, focusing in specific arcs, and ensuring privacy, so that loud music doesn't disturb others. Sort of like keeps things directional and just sort of focused on you, which is, I think, a clever technological solution to having roommates on a starship, right? Or close by. Like if you've got NPCs where this comes into play and they're living in a really highly urbanized area, they can be listening to loud music for themselves in their room that is sort of buffered by technology, so it's not bothering their neighbors. But maybe it short circuits, and they are, and you have to kind of deal with a dispute. But then you get a little higher in tech, and with forms of with the forms of electronic leisure out there, and these will sort of come into play later in the episodes when we get into our system spotlight with Alekvadin and another planet I want to talk about, because they'll sort of directly tie in. But I've played with this idea of what I call senses or SemSense rigs on so this would be tech level 11 or 12. You've got it's sensory simulation, which I feel like is sort of the ultimate medium, and citizens can plug directly into immersive virtual reality, experiencing this kind of full sensory and emotional experience of recordings of historical fiction to sports to, explicit escapist fantasies. They can kind of feel it and live it in these sort of simulated sensory rigs. And similarly to that, you've got VR and AR games, obviously virtual and augmented reality games, which I feel like would be ubiquitous from, the sports leagues. I mean, you name it, whatever you come up with. Zero-G sports, orbital grav ball, zero-G martial arts, just kind of fun things to think about. I think just anyway, more ways to think about. And again, the central supply catalog gives us more options on this too, more specific ones than the sort of invented ones that I sort of made up in my brain. You've got VR goggles on page 87. These are at tech level 8, 10, and 12. So it's that, like I was just talking about, the basic VR, AR vision, hearing, which is at tech level 8. At tech level 10, it improves to provide holographic environments, tactile feedback in the gloves. And then by tech level 12, you get them at like really lightweight, virtually unnoticeable as you're being immersed in this sort of entertainment. Great from everything from simulations to training content, right down to obviously entertainment, which we're talking about here today, right? Then you've got the VR helmets on page 87, tech levels 9, 11, and even 13. These allow for deeper immersion than just the standard goggles. The tech level 11 version features brain stimulation interfaces that emulate real sensory perception, and include smell, taste, full body tactile sensations. And then the tech level 13 version is lightweight and extends the battery life to 24 hours. So you could basically just spend a whole day in a virtual reality of your choosing. Then you got VR immersion chairs and extended immersion kits. This is on page 87 of the catalog. Tech level 13, described as the ultimate VR experience. The chair puts the user into a lucid, dreamlike state, temporarily disconnecting their nervous system from their body for total immersion. And then there's an extended like the extended immersion kit, quote unquote, adds medical grade feeding, waste disposal, and muscle conditioning. So a user could basically stay in VR indefinitely. You could just check out of reality of your life and just live in this extended immersion kit in your own new reality, your own entertainment reality, right? And that has a lot of dark implications for you as a referee to play with, or for a traveler to kind of investigate, right? I mean, there are plenty of interesting things that you could do with that alone, I feel like. And anyway, these were just some things as I was researching this. You turn to the catalog and you say, okay, what if you're thinking about what sort of entertainment types exist and how do people consume it? I wanted to go to the gear, and I found anyway these interesting things that I just wanted to share with you. So let me know, because this was the Central Supply catalog, but I know across a lot of Journal of the Traveler's Aid Society, even outside of Mongoose Traveler 2nd Edition, over the years, there have probably been other gadgets and gear and types of entertainment technology that's out there that exists. If you've come up with some, let me know. Drop me a line, coresignalsmail@gmail.com, or tag me on Blue Sky. Hit me up on one of the Facebook groups that I'm on. Share with me how do you do this? What have you come up with to sort of add to your world in terms of the gadgets that are available to your players or in your Traveler universe? Across each one of these tiers, offer opportunities for travelers if you want them to. And, so you ask, like, oh, well, how? I mean, how? Well, I've kind of talked about it a little bit, but at its briefest, most basic level, think about the first tier, right? With even those standard holo-vids, your travelers could have a side hustle selling bootleg holo-vids to people on planets that don't typically get them. And that's a fun, relatively lucrative gig you could take in a lot of different ways. From pissing off the wrong producers and studios to encroaching on someone else's black market business or racket. It's really up to you. The idea is to first depict it as important and something worth doing, which will then sort of play into how it affects the game, right? Which will sort of be a recurring element of today's episode. This sort of create the tapestry first so that when you utilize it in your game, there's more impact, right? For the middle tier, we'll look at that too, but anytime technology comes into play, you've got the potential to play with moguls and corporate shenanigans, maybe some blackmail, right? When there's, what I mean by that is when you've got high tech or technology, like those VR rigs, things that you can hack into or get footage from, right? There's a lot to play with there, especially in a science fiction game. So that's interesting. Just let your imagination run wild with that for a second. And then the third is probably the most obvious, right? Because you're going places, you're accompanying or seeking out patrons and persons of interest on location. Sort of like our Ansel Dravain example from episode 10, where he's a culinary documentarian and wants you to take him to an Amber Zone planet, right? And that's some of what we'll touch on today with the safaris, and that will come into play in our review of Invasive Species. But there's another alternative to that, where another option is search and rescue version, where a patron hires the travelers not to accompany someone on a safari, but what happened to a person who never came back from the safari, or on an expedition to locate a rumored derelict ship on a remote part of the subsector, and you got to go look for them. There's that angle to play with as well. There all comes down to what people are doing to amuse themselves or take up their time. It plays right into the idle rich aspect that can always sort of be simmering below the surface of core sector gameplay, right? You've got a lot of folks with a lot of money, a lot of noble heritage happening here, a lot of dilettantes, I imagine, where those are jobs for your travelers, and they tie directly into the theme of today's show, with people trying to entertain themselves and spend their time doing things. It all just really depends on what you and your players find interesting. The point today is hopefully just to give you some idea of alternative aspects to playing Traveler in the core differently than you would be able to anywhere else in a lot of ways. In the case of safaris and search missions, sure, those could work anywhere, but with some of these other things, it just gives you a few different angles to approach them here in the core. Again, like I said, because there are a lot more, I guess, not to be repetitive, but I'll be repetitive. Like I just said, a lot more dilettantes at play here in the core than probably anywhere else in the Imperium or Charted Space. So you've got a higher concentration of the sorts of people who would be getting themselves into trouble doing nothing but screwing around, trying to entertain themselves with some of these things that people do to entertain themselves here in the core. So hopefully you're starting to get the idea or the feel of what I'm trying to convey here, that there's this incredibly rich kind of tapestry of cultural entertainment in the core. And yeah, across the Third Imperium in general, sure. But particularly here in the core, because like I said, you have a lot of options available to you here that, you know, not only is it that historical aspect to tap into here, but like I said, you've got that access to more people with means. And they're into that starfaring and off-world tourism on cruise liners, the ultra wealthy going on massive luxury liners to just navigate the stars because they can afford to, and are always seeking out options that offer safe, opulent travel between the most beautiful resort-heavy star systems in Charted Space, right? We did a whole episode around creating a sandbox using those elements of the Singularity campaign. So again, if we're looking through that lens of prepping for that ongoing core sandbox, using Singularity as a launch pad and sticking with that framework, then there's going to be a lot of tourism aspects at play there. And so you have to come up with a sort of entertaining things for the passengers to want to do and get up to on the various planets on each of the routes that you would be on in a campaign like that. So you have to kind of think, well, what is that? What do they want to do? How are they going to be entertained? And clearly, you've got sports. You have live sporting events, concerts, cultural things of that nature that we've talked about in previous episodes and that everybody sort of gets, right? Those are going to vary from planet to planet, but give you an opportunity to pick and choose or invent new ones and reasons to travel, right? So because you always have to think, why would somebody of wealth and means want to travel? Why would they want to go on a tour? Well, maybe they can't get what they're after on their own planet. They have to go to a different planet to get that, because on that different planet is where their favorite sport is played at a higher level than it's played on their home world. Man, thank God for cough buttons. So you have the historical, we also have these historical reenactments in museums, like I mentioned at the top of the show, in a lot of the source materials, right? And each planet would have its own unique take on those tributes, historical sites, places to see, things to do there. Again, reasons for tourism, for people to want to go to different places. You would have food tours, various cuisines that people like to sample, just because, and that's an analog that can easily be borrowed from life here on Earth, right? We have that. Wine tours, local food tastings, food tourism, and culinary tourism is very big. And I imagine the same is true in Traveler. And it's backed up by a lot of the source material too. Remember that Villani heritage subsectors where those Shigili shows are super popular in certain areas, like the Parit subsector. So it all sort of checks out reasons to travel, reasons to go and see different things and take part in different cultures. But some other ideas, we mentioned arena sports, but you could even have blood sports like gladitorial combat or fully mechanized combat with battle robot fights, popular in some places, but not others. So people would want to go travel to those, especially people with means, right? They're going to go see something that doesn't exist or maybe is outlawed on their planet. Right? Cyber augmented brawling that you could kind of toy with, underground style fights where the rich and wealthy pay to watch these sort of depraved barbaric battles where, you're not going to get that necessarily on Capitol, but you could find another place that does allow it, and it's super big, super popular, and you can bet on it, and it just interesting things to play with there. Obviously, there are clubs and casino gambling, mega cities with luxurious multi-level gambling halls. There's like a whole pleasure planet that we'll get into on a future episode that's just ripe with this sort of thing. Then you've got live performances that you could be chasing because the tour isn't going to come necessarily to your planet. So you have to go to take part in some of the music that you would want, or the ballet or the theater, right? Those analogs of our own world, but just amped up to 11 for Traveler on a different level, where these just give you reasons to go and experience, because the music of one planet is just so different than your own. And you want to have that cosmopolitan flavor. And it's just something that you could do that, again, sort of unique to the core sector, because you've got so much high society wealth and nobility here that can just throw money at it and go and do whatever they want. And that's an opportunity for you to employ a traveler and employ your player. And then we've hinted at this, but similar to Safari, xenotourism, the thrill of observing alien cultures, exotic wildlife, visiting strange ruins, which can be hazardous, but for some of these wealthy folks, that's part of the thrill, right? The thrill of the hazard and being adventurous and employing travelers to protect you from it, but still sort of getting that adrenaline rush. You could play with that idea too. A lot of fun, a lot of interesting ways that you could bring this to the table. And in the core, I was thinking you have the benefit of not only having that sort of rich cosmopolitan style culture that's in play here, but you've got the cultural blend that's really textured as well. So you can have Silean-based tourism or Villani, obviously, like we talked about, but there are elements of, you could have Soleimani people coming to visit, to take part in that, or alien scholars who just want to study it and enrich themselves with understanding the Silean heritage, right? Or maybe you have an Aslan diplomat hosted by a human noble, and they're touring together because they want to share culture, and he's trying to kind of woo him, the Aslan, for favors, and he's just trying to impress impress upon him or her that culture, that cultural aspect. It also gives you an opportunity to think about the sorts of holo-vids that would depict things and how that plays out, right? And so the way I kind of think about it is a lot of the holo-vids would depict things that happen on the frontier, which doesn't necessarily lend itself to adventure in the core per se, but it does, I guess, in terms of who the celebrities might be, if there are actors on tour in the core, because you think, okay, what could this be? And maybe they're researching a role and trying to get a sense of things by traveling to different areas. So I guess that plays less into the frontier aspect, but can tie into how fiction can tie itself to action in the adventures that your traveler's on. Because, they're big into, whatever the far future version of method acting is where they just have to soak in some of these reenactment events and get as close to living it, quote unquote, as they can before they can effectively dramatize it. So they're, they become a handful for the travelers to attend to on these trips, because they're sort of embodying the performance that they're going to have to partake in. But really, they're just on a tour because they want to see some of these reenactments that you hear about in the Third Imperium source book that happen, right off, in the capital system. Some of those famous battles that have taken place. I mean, you could even take that to the nth degree, getting back to the frontier aspect, though. You could start an adventure in the core with one of these folks, and you have to travel with them to the frontier. And it almost becomes like a quest to get from the core to the Spinward Marches to take this person to, I don't know, Ifate or Regina or Jewel, right? And you have all of the different adventures that could take place along the way, just going from core to the Spinward Marches with a celebrity type who is looking for a rich experience that they can embody in order to perform better in their role of a lifetime that's coming up. I don't know. There's just there's a bevy of adventures. The flip side of that is there are a bevy of adventures happening out on the frontier, right? And for me, that's what I feel like is the potential in-world fiction and what that would tap into here. That, they wouldn't necessarily be making things up whole cloth, although I suppose they could. But it's one of the interesting things to me is to think about, that what those big studios on Turthu, like in Turthu in my Traveler universe, if you remember, is a city on Capitol where it's kind of like analogous to our Hollywood here on Earth. And they would produce a lot of historical fiction. You might even call it propagandist fiction, playing up imperial fortitude and the perseverance of people of the Imperium. So you'd get a lot of the Imperium versus the Jodani kinds of shows, just kind of that raw sort of aspect to play up and champion would come into play. I think would be part of what the focus of some of those entertainment productions would be. And for the flavor, that sort of ties into, let's look at, it would tap into something like the Murderbot Diaries is a really good example for me. The Murderbot Diaries is a really good book series. And I feel like it's one that translates really well to Traveler. I think they've adapted it into a TV series I think it's on Apple TV. But a big aspect of that series is the main character's consumption of media. he's always referencing these big action or drama serials. And I think that's a lot like how I feel serials in Traveler would be. I think they would be based on, hyper fictionalized or hyper stylized versions of things that actually happened out on the fringes or in different areas of charted space, particularly the popular kind in the core, maybe, where you'd have things that happened out in the Trojan Reach or in the Spinward Marches. Maybe you'd get heroic tales from the Fourth Frontier War, or legendary Imperial Navy officers taking on infamous pirates on the outskirts of the Imperium. I populate my Traveler universe with this kind of thing because I just genuinely think it would be ubiquitous. That would be the kind of stuff that people would want to consume here. And we'll get a little further into this in another segment as to, the whys and hows. But the thing for me is, in my setting, I want there to be this underlying feeling of bread and circuses always simmering along beneath the surface. There's lots of distractions happening here to pull focus, right? Keep people entertained is a common theme that I always like to sprinkle throughout my games. But there's another thread a referee can pull here too, because depending on your players and the way you want to stylize your campaign, maybe they've come to the core from the Spinward Marches or from another area of space altogether. Like, what if you're playing a campaign with the same characters following up from Pirates of Drinax? Or, maybe not even a long-term campaign. Maybe you've just had some other adventures. Maybe you've dipped your toe into Traveler and now you've listened to this podcast and you want to try things in the core, but you don't want to roll all new characters. So you've run Rescue on Rui or Rule of Man Commemorative or Murder on Arcturus Station or Death Station, right? Free adventure. Maybe you've run that. Doesn't take place in the core. Doesn't matter, right? Use whatever example fits your game. But I'm thinking of this scenario where you run some things out in other areas of space, the Reach, the Marches, and you're thinking, how could I ever move it to core? Especially if you want to keep those same players in a persistent campaign. Okay, well, maybe the tales of your Traveler's exploits have made their way to the core somehow. And you've got a production crew now chasing after them or following them to sort of fictionalize what they've been up to. Like maybe a writer who gloms onto them. And that leads them to the core somehow. Or, and it's probably not like a documentary, but say you could take it to even farther extremes. You've got a producer or director who brings them here because they're like, this is awesome. I could sell this. This is $1 trillion media idea. And he's going to make them an offer they can't refuse. So maybe even unwittingly, your Travelers end up in the core, on Capitol, in Turthu, because this mega powerful media mogul is determined that he's going to make a holo series out of your Traveler's exploits, and he wants the rights, and he's going to strong arm them and brings them here to force the deal and keep them out of circulation until it happens, and then tour them and make a mint off of them once it's a hit. He's got to sort of keep them safe, keep them secure, keep them under lock and key while he shoots this thing, and then do it as sort of like a publicity stunt, maybe, right? Or maybe he wants to document a sort of fish out of water aspect by bringing this frontier crew here, making their way through Capitol in a new series that he's dreamt up, where he's like, okay, you're here, now what? How are you gonna make ends meet here in Capitol? You've been successful out wherever they've been adventuring. Now you're here in Capitol, and we're gonna we're going to shoot it, we're going to record it. So that documentary sort of aspect of it, just a few things to sort of play with there that I've sort of toyed with the idea of how could I make that work? Could that be anything? So, Captain, you're saying these are great theories, but how do we play this? What are some adventure seeds that could tie into entertainment media in the core? Well, I've floated a few, but again, to me, proximity, as always, and I've said this before, I'm going to say it maybe on every episode. When it comes to playing in the core, proximity is your ally here. Your travelers could be rubbing elbows with the rich, powerful, influential, and wealthy, taking jobs either for them or to somehow thwart them, stealing prototypes for a new immersive technology used to consume media. We talked about all that technology a couple of segments back, right? Bam, there's some opportunities there where a rival mogul is like they're developing a new VR suite and it's going to knock mine off the top pedestal, so we got to steal the prototype. Or cameras or holo capture gear with recording devices have to be really popular here. So there could be things that come into play there. Seedy aspects could also come into play. Maybe a noble is known to have a dark, twisted proclivity for things that he doesn't want known. He's got a collection of media that would ruin him if the broader peerage knew about it. My point here in thinking through this is in favor of fleshing out that cultural aspect more thoroughly to get a flavor of things better. These are ways to make the world feel more lived in. Things you can keep in mind at all times to sort of color your worlds and add texture to them that can also be used as seeds whenever you need them. But the point to me is try not to deal in abstracts all of the time, right? What is the media people consume? What are the ads they see or are inundated with when they arrive at a star town? Because an example I'll use is when you need to use them for a hook, you have them because they're always there. They're always around. And they won't necessarily seem out of place, which will let you avoid, the example I'll use is the Odie bar ad situation from the movie Serenity, where, spoiler alert for a 20-year-old movie maybe, but River Tam is activated in a scene by subliminal messaging in a video ad for the Fruity Nutty Odie bars, right? Which is a plot device that could have been a lot richer had commercials like that been ubiquitous before it was needed for the plot. And for the record, before people come at me, I love Firefly and I love Serenity, the movie, so much. And I have no real problem with that scene or that movie, except to say, I just have always thought that it would have hit harder, that scene would have hit harder if it had been seeded a bit more strongly or thoroughly and had been able to be a callback to things that we'd seen from the TV episodes. That's all. And so in your traveler adventure, you have an opportunity to do that by layering all of these things in as part of the DNA of your game. So sort of the point of talking about all of this is to make media and entertainment feel ubiquitous. That feeling of bread and circuses all of the time, because then you can get the seeds and the hooks when you need them. And it doesn't feel like it's shoehorned in or awkwardly placed or an obvious plot contrivance, right? Because then you're just borrowing from an aspect of your game that's always present, omnipresent in your game. And I think it hits harder when you do that. And there are tools that the game gives you too. I was watching a video that Seth Skorkowski did recently that reminded me of things I kind of forgotten about in some of the books. The three Starship books that Mongoose published a few years back, the Small Craft Catalog, Adventure Class Ships, and the other one that I'm forgetting off the top of my head, Traders and Gunboats. You are given, there's one example, and I wish this is off the top of my head, so I didn't have a chance to look it up, but I know I think it's in Small Craft. They're the billboard ship that could just always be floating around. And as soon as you're kind of coming into a certain proximity of space, you're getting advertisements all of the time. Pepper things like this into your game to give it that sort of texture and that flavor at all times. And then you have arrows in your quiver when you need them that don't feel like they've come out of the blue. So just think about it is my advice. Think about the things that you think, or because you know your players better than anyone else, would be fun for your players. Think about the things that they find fun and precede them into your world as background and texture and layers. So they always feel familiar and almost mundane when you need to add a twist or a plot to them. Some of the best adventures happen when the ordinary becomes the extraordinary, right? Out of the blue. And this goes for players too. Players who are listening, this is cooperative storytelling. So lest we forget, think about things that layer your player and your character, because these are things that would give your referee threads to pull on. And I'm not talking about dark secrets from your past and old enemies and all that. I mean, yes, those are fun to play, and I'm not faulting you for having that or wanting that. Obviously, that's the nature of role playing, right? But in the nature of giving an opportunity for the ordinary to become the extraordinary, think about some quirks your character has. So another example, and it ties, into something I was talking about earlier. One of my players, she would never admit it. She won't admit it, but I'm fairly certain that she was inspired by Murderbot, which we were just talking about a couple of segments ago. But her character is infatuated with collecting and consuming media. Just a junkie for media. And it's something she likes to do at every port of call, is look for new and interesting holo-vids from the planet, or what she can sort of find there that she couldn't find anywhere else. She's, that's one of the things that we do in every Star Town. That's one of the first things that her character wants to do. And eventually, after this played out over a series of game sessions, I had it where she got a version of a holo-vid she wasn't supposed to have. And that spun into a whole adventure yarn involving the proprietor desperately trying to get it back after realizing his mistake, members of a syndicate that it was meant for trying to track it down. And it was a lot of fun. And even talking about it here, it may sound a little cliche now as I explain it, because it's such a simple tropey setup, but it didn't start as a tropey setup. Right? It was just something about her character that became a thing over time that I spun into another thing. I just kind of latched onto it and thought it would be a fun thing when we were between sort of adventures. And I thought, well, let's do this and see what gets us into trouble. And it was honestly a random roll that turned into this, where I kind of took the vague hook on the random table I was using. I don't even exactly remember what it was, but it was, a transaction goes wrong, at the Star Town. It was something like that I was like, oh, what could this be? And I was like, oh, well, she's always, doing, collecting the holo-vids. So it was just, it was a lot of fun. And so I just wanted to kind of give you all that example, because it fits really neatly into our theme today. So I just thought about it. But in that, honestly, that extends well beyond core sector play too. Obviously, just encourage your players to have a thing, a quirk. It could be a gun enthusiast like Jane in Firefly that we were just talking about. Do they have a prized possession or a unique hobby? Speaking of entertainment, another example I could get into and might save for another time that I just thought of is one of my players during character creation was interested in what's an analog for professional wrestling, because he wanted his character to be like an ex-pro wrestler. So he's like, well, what is that? What is that in Traveler? Like, I have no idea. And then another player was like, that's awesome. I want to be a fan of the whatever the wrestling is. So we came up with this whole thing that an analog for pro wrestling that I do not have time to get into today, but maybe we'll talk about on another episode sometime, where it's kind of this thing that's almost threatening to become a mini campaign of its own in some ways, with some of the turns that have taken place. But again, today's example is entertainment, and this could just as easily be about, whatever it might be. It could just as easily be about finding modifications for the ship for your engineer, right? Or taking pictures or video captures of every star town you visit, because that's just the thing you do, or one of your characters does. And one time you're capturing the wrong footage at the wrong time, and that leads to complications, right? Find ordinary things your travelers like to do, and down the line, take the opportunity to make them extraordinary by adding a twist to them. Just so be mindful of what are the things and the quirks and the hobbies and elements of your traveler that you could kind of glom onto and twist into something down the line to make the lived-in world something a little more interesting down the line. And now it's time for a couple of system spotlights, where we take a look at the sweatshops of Dudin and the high-tech fabricators of Alekvadin, each of which builds the hyper-stimulating hardware that allows the cosmopolitan citizens of the core to safely gorge themselves on the galaxy's most intense, thrilling, and exotic experiences. Basically, they build a lot of the gadgets and technology that we were talking about across a lot of this episode. Both are located in the heavily populated Sanchez subsector, considered by most to be the gateway to Dagudashag. But the Sanchezian Prime worlds, which is a high population cluster of worlds centered around the Sanchez system itself, are primarily focused on serving the core sector. I'm quoting from the Third Imperium sourcebook here. Its two industrial worlds, Alekvadin along with Dudin, manufacture many of the sector's consumer electronics and entertainment devices. Sanchez brings in a great deal of wealth from the sales of its products to the other worlds of the core, and exports to other sectors as well. The business of the subsector is business. Its culture is highly collective, with individual needs and wants set aside in order to serve the greater good of the core. The subsector is mostly surrounded by less populated provincial subsectors. Therefore, the transportation of its goods requires the assistance of long-range freighters that bridge the gaps to the other high population worlds of the sector. So you've got some adventure seeds nestled right in those few sentences. Many of these starships are constructed in this subsector at the shipyards on Kakugash, and Sanchez itself. While the yards on Sanchez are also used by military contractors, the majority of their products are civilian in nature and include the production of mega freighters of 50,000 to 500,000 tons and ranging from Jump 1 to Jump 4 in performance. The Sanchez subsector economy is bolstered by two small Jump 1 mains, the Sanchez cluster to Spinward and the Quadrant I main, which dips into Apki, Puri, and Maki. Sanchez's high population worlds have economies that far outstrip those of its neighbors, and the Sanchezian traders rarely pass up the chance to remind them of this. Sanchez's well-to-do worlds see themselves as powerful engines of prosperity for which their neighbors should be thankful. Sanchezian arrogance is mostly tolerated as long as the credits keep flowing into their coffers. So that gives you a kind of a little overview of the subsector itself. And now we're going to take a closer look at the two worlds mentioned in that overview, Dudin and Alekvadin. So Dudin is the one that actually gets a write-up in the Third Imperium sourcebook. And I'm paraphrasing it here in this little write-up, and then I'll quote from it, some of it as well. But basically, Dudin is a high population and industrial world located in Sanchez. Its UWP is D528A89-B. And I'm not going to go through what all of those mean, but I mean, if you know, you know. D is a starport, so it doesn't have the highest quality starport. B, relatively high tech. There at the end. 9, pretty strict law level, high population. Anyway, it serves as a major manufacturing hub for the core sector. It's heavily focused on producing consumer electronics and extravagant entertainment devices. Despite its immense productivity, the planet's natural environment is highly inhospitable. Dudin features a very thin, tainted atmosphere, and 80% of its surface is covered in frozen water. Consequently, its massive population of approximately 60 billion people lives tightly packed within towering arcologies and orbital habitats. Its society and government, visitors often view Dudin's society as a quote-unquote industrial dystopian nightmare, yet its citizens are remarkably content with their lives. And we'll get to the reasons why here coming up. The planet is governed by an executive bureau, an institution that enforces an extreme version of the traditional Volani caste system. Rather than individuals choosing their own vocations, the bureau makes all caste and career decisions to meticulously manage the workforce across the planet's millions of factories. The contentment of the Dudinian populace is entirely manufactured. Over the centuries, citizens have been subjugated to genetic engineering and that has altered the nucleus accumbens, the amygdala, and the prefrontal cortex of their brains. As a result, Dudinians require significantly less dopamine to feel happiness and satisfaction, which allows them to remain perfectly content while performing solitary, repetitive factory labor day after day. Other unique aspects of this genetically managed society, while married couples and traditional families do exist, all children are subjugated to the genetic engineering and ensure that they meet the Executive Bureau's strict standards. And also in play here, if the population dips and labor shortages occur, the government simply manufactures clones to fill the gaps. So they just have the right to clone citizens, just to keep the population at a steady level in order to maintain productivity, right? But that isn't to say eugenics are actively practiced here. They're not. If a citizen develops a random genetic mutation or shows a resistance to the conditioning, they're not executed. They just are deported to nearby worlds to live out their relatively normal, distinctly non-Dudidian lives. And while they manufacture the complex high-tech entertainment devices for the rest of the core, Dudidians actually find these products overstimulating and potentially physically painful. So they prefer simple, low-tech, artistic, or gaming hobbies that won't overload their altered pleasure centers, right? And I'm quoting from the Third Imperium sourcebook directly here when I say, quote, "When they are not engaged in labor, Dudidians become involved with a number of simple pastimes that unaltered humans would find trite or even boring. These activities enable them to comfortably operate in a society that offers little opportunity for upward mobility and requires them to engage in repetitive labor day after day, or day in, day out. Ironically, the primary products that they produce are electronics for complex and extravagant entertainment equipment that is used throughout the core and beyond. Dudidians would find such devices overly stimulating, possibly even causing them physical pain. They prefer the simplicity of low-tech artistic, hobbyist, or gaming pastimes that do not threaten to overload their pleasure centers." And then finally here, the citizens are allowed to age and retire comfortably, but the catch is they're provided with almost no health care. So once their utility and usefulness to the Executive Bureau has expired, the society sees little value in spending any resources to keep them alive. They just live as long as they live. No one's keeping them alive. No one's giving them kind of extended life care. You just kind of live out your days until you croak. And that is Dudin. It's like a super fascinating planet. Now, Alekvadin, on the other hand, has next to nothing written about it, which, as I've talked about before, is the most fun, because you know what that means. UWP interpretation time. So Alekvadin, its UWP is B675AABE, which, if you know anything about UWPs, this is pretty wild. Its trade codes are high population, HI, high tech, HT, industrial, IN, and it is an amber zone. Alekvadin is the core sector's clean-faced machine hell. A rich, disciplined, high-tech industrial world that sells delight to billions while treating its own population like an input stream. It makes entertainment devices, consumer electronics, immersive media rigs, household robotics, disposable fashion tech, dreamwear, many of the devices that keep half the core amused and occupied. The irony is that while Alekvadin exports distraction, the planetary government permits very little of it. So now we'll actually break down the UWP here, because it's just fascinating, and I've spent probably too much time playing around with my interpretation of this planet. Like I said, I can't help myself. It's one of my favorite things to do in Traveler. So the starport is B. It's a good quality facility, right? What can I say? You can get refined fuel there. It's got repair facilities. It's got a high port and a down port. It's a shipyard capable of spacecraft construction, and it's got relatively high berthing costs. So it's basically, we'll get into starports in a little more a little more deeply in a future episode. I recently, just as an aside, picked up the Starports supplement from GURPS Traveler, as a matter of fact. And while obviously I'm actually not really a fan of GURPS rules whatsoever, the background material and the supplementary material in a lot of those GURPS books are fantastic for just adding color to Traveler, whichever version you're playing. So I would say I highly recommend it. We'll get into it, like I said, another time, but I just wanted to throw that out there because I'm not spending a lot of time on the Starport because I want to spend the bulk of the time in this system spotlight elsewhere, which we'll get into in a few minutes. Size is 6. That's a 9,600 kilometer diameter with a surface gravity of 0.7 G. That's a low gravity, which kind of allows for spindly life forms, improbable rock formations, and flying is a common form of locomotion. Its atmosphere is 7. It's standard but tainted. So it has an Earth-like pressure but contains harmful elements, and travelers have to wear filter masks on the surface because breathing the air unprotected would cause 1D damage every few minutes. So that, and there's a lot of things you can do there because it's up to you to determine what causes that taint, the taint to the air. Is it the industrialization of the world? Is it spores? Is it a combination? I haven't really decided yet on my version of Alekvadin, but your mileage may vary of what you come up with, and that's the fun of it, right? Hydrographics is 5. That's a surface liquid, covers roughly half, 46 to 55% of the planet, effectively forming large oceans there. So now we get into some of the really more interesting aspects that I did dive into here. The population is A. That's tens of billions of inhabitants. Tens of billions. Which obviously directly aligns with its high population trade code, right? You got to be in the billions to be considered HI in your trade code. But I've been diving into, this is on a recommendation of a listener and somebody on, I believe, the Mongoose Discord also hipped me to the World Builder's Handbook, which I've owned and browsed through and looked at the math and decided I am not a math person and have rarely dived too deeply into it. But lately, I have been dipping into it a little more, particularly on the section dedicated to the social characteristics of the planet. So that's not building your own worlds. That's more like taking your existing world and interpreting, fleshing out some of the more social characteristics, like more exact populations, law level beyond weapon and armor, what weapon and armor levels are banned. So the World Builder's Handbook gives a procedure for refining it beyond just that kind of standard tens of billions bucket. And for Alekvadin, I used the standard p-value method. So I rolled a d3. For the first d3 roll, I rolled a 2. Second d3 roll, I rolled a 3. The first D roll contributes a 3. The second one adds another 3. So I come up with a p-value of 6, which gives Alekvadin a base population of approximately 60 billion, which I wasn't super excited about necessarily because Dudin has a 60 billion population as well. So I was like, oh, that's a little too on the nose. That's very similar, but whatever. That's fine. It's fine. It's fine. The handbook then allows for additional significant digits using D10 rolls, so you can kind of flesh it out beyond just the round number of 60 billion. And so I rolled, the first digit was a 3, second D10 roll was a 2. So that translates into about 63 billion, 200 million. So 63.2 billion inhabitants is its population. Then you can kind of get into some other aspects to help you determine how the population is dispersed. So I also use the handbook to calculate the population concentration rating, the urbanization percentage, and the number of major cities that exist here. So we'll walk through that really quickly. Because Alekvadin has a population of A, we skip the low population preliminary check and roll 1d plus its applicable dice modifiers, right? So for its UWP, population is 9 plus, so you get a dice modifier of -2. It's industrial, so I get a dice modifier of 1. Size 6 gives no modifier. Government A gives no modifier. Tech level 14 offers no PCR modifier because it only kind of applies through tech level 9. Alekvadin is not agricultural or rich, so I get a net DM of -1. Sorry, my notes are a little sloppy here. I rolled a 6. 6 minus 1 is a PCR of 5, which is slightly concentrated, but I did that for the exercise and then realized the handbook says that on worlds with populations in the billions, settlement is spread across most of the world regardless of PCR. The PCR instead describes the degree to which the largest urban areas are clustered. Alekvadin therefore has settlements across most habitable land and coastal regions, but its population is pulled into immense industrial urban concentrations by state and its production economy. So then we turn to urbanization percentage. Handbook calls for a 2D roll plus dice modifiers. So Alekvadin receives, for its population A plus, a DM of +4 with a minimum urbanization of 50%. Law level is a 9 plus, so you get another +1 dice modifier there. Tech level is 10 plus, so I get another +1 dice modifier. PCR of 5 gives no dice modifier, so all in all, I get a +6 modifier. So I rolled a 7, and +6 is 13. Result of 13 plus gives urbanization percentage greater than 99%. So this next part is going to be a lot of fun because it's a lot of math, but bear with me because Alekvadin has a population A and a PCR of 5, falls under case 5, all other concentration values. Anyway, the handbook formula is major cities equals 2D minus PCR plus parenthetical urbanization percentage times 20 divided by the PCR. So I rolled an 8 on 2D. So that's 8 minus the PCR, which our PCR is 5. So 8 minus 5 plus, then you do the parenthetical, 0.99 times 20 divided by 5, which comes out to 3 plus 3.96, which gives us a sum of 6.96. You round fractions up, as the rules state. So that leaves us with 7 major cities. So 7 immense urban industrial concentrations containing a substantial portion of its population. I even went so far as to name and sort of profile, at least give myself some starting profiles of what these 7 cities are. And then I cheated and gave it an orbital ring too, which we'll sort of get to. But these 7 cities are Vaden Crown, the planetary capital, largest city and seat of the government, which we'll get into in a few minutes. I'm not going to spoil it here. Then we have the Krelta Charspire, which is Alekvadin's great administrative and financial metropolis outside of the capital. It's home to the central banking system, commodity exchanges, trade courts, commercial registries, actuarial bureaus, and there's just the enormous state apparatus responsible for measuring and directing the world's substantial wealth and population control and all of that jazz. So it's a little bit of a similar situation here as Cleon and Intel on Capital. If you remember when we profiled that, that's what's sort of happening with the Vadencrown and Kralta Spire. Then we have the Keth Array, which is the world's largest consumer electronics manufacturing center, built around immense automated fabrication districts and their supporting populations. We have Orem Sea Line, which is a coastal industrial urban centers dominated by wet fabrication, bioplastics, aquaculture, and just a lot of industry that requires a lot of water. Dallin Rise is a vast low-gravity tower city complex in the center of entertainment systems, neural interfaces, sensory technology, immersive media production. Falk Meridian is the mobile Grav City complex, an elite center of industrial design, cultural engineering, and advanced technical research happens here. Orden Zenith is a highly controlled industrial city specializing in advanced components, restricted technologies, civilian manufacturing with extensive military applications. So they're kind of doing some interesting things here that I want to sort of play with call it bioengineering. And then there's Mender's Ring, which is the extensive network of orbital habitats, cargo terminals, shipyards, warehouses, with residential cylinders. And so basically sort of the high port, we'll call it. Now, the government code is A, so that's a 10, and it represents a charismatic dictatorship, which in the book, it says this type of government ruling functions are performed by agencies directed by a single leader who enjoys the overwhelming confidence of the citizenry. Examples of this leadership style include revolutionary leader, an emperor, a monarch, or a president for life. On Alekvadin, that is the government is the sovereign directorate of Alekvadin, and the charismatic dictator is His Supremacy Tsar Evikin Tal, the High Lord Director of the planet. And so the name, the Sovereign Directorate, I kept sovereign in there. Basically, every public institution, industrial mandate, court, security service, civic authority, every economic body derives its authority from the central state and ultimately from the High Lord Director himself. And keeping that sovereign sort of mentality, kind of making it seem that large, creates a useful tension with a planetary duchy that is in existence here, which we'll talk about shortly when we talk about the invasive species adventure. But what it boils down to is there's a planetary duke here, Ernst Okhotnikov. Duke Ernst Okhotnikov. And it creates this kind of nice tension with the Duke and with the Imperium. So Alekvadin calls its government sovereign, even though the world exists within the Third Imperium and isn't really sovereign. So imperial officials sort of regard that as provocative, but the officials on Alekvadin insist it only refers to its sovereignty over its own internal affairs. Under the Sovereign Directorate sit 6 great organs of state, other subdirectorates. Those are the Subdirectorate of Production and Compliance. Motto is the factories must produce. And this controls all industrial planning, production quotas, manufacturing standards, resource allocation, corporate mandates, technological licensing, workplace inspection, and enforcement of state production directives. Then we have the Subdirectorate of Labor and Order. Motto is the population must serve. This controls labor assignments, population deployment, internal security, policing, public assembly, migration between production regions, detention facilities, and the suppression of any organized resistance. Then we have the Subdirectorate of Civic Discipline. Motto is the citizen must conform. This controls education, media, cultural policy, public morality, censorship, civic surveillance, what I'm calling the contribution index, which is ideological instruction, family policies, and the correction of any socially disruptive behavior. The Subdirectorate of Civic Discipline and Labor and Order work very hand in hand, very tightly. Excuse me. Then we have the Subdirectorate of Trade and Finance. Its motto is the wealth of Alekvadin must remain an instrument of the state. It controls taxation, banking, currency flows, commercial licensing, imports, exports, off-world investment, customs policy outside of imperial extrality, financial investigations and relations with megacorporations, and imperial commercial interests. So this is the main interface with the imperial bureaucracy, if you will. Then we have the Subdirectorate of Population and Demographic Compliance, motto being the population must adhere to the needs of the state. This controls demographic planning, population targets, birth and family policy, housing allocation, residential eligibility, internal resettlement, urban density, habitation development, and general workforce requirements, and oversees the compulsory redistribution of populations between Alekvadin's industrial regions when necessary. The Subdirectorate of Transit and Control. So what does mass transit look like on a world of 60 plus billion inhabitants? Its motto is movement is a privilege granted by the state. It controls planetary transportation networks, mass transit, freight corridors, civilian flight lanes, grav traffic, orbital transfer systems, and issues movement permits, travel restrictions, transport scheduling, oversees all the restricted zones, surveillance, interception, and any denial of movement across Alekvadin. So if you get locked down, if travelers get locked down, they're answering to this subdirectorate. And there's some other details that you can flesh out using on this government type using the World Builder's Handbook that I haven't really dived too deeply into, but it helps you define how the government type impacts a world's other kind of specific characterization, so you can further define government structure and authority with the level of executive dominance in play, military and expansion, militancy and expansionism, law and uniformity, how focused they are in military, how the armed forces are structured, what their military budget is, and even down to some of the economic aspects, which I just haven't dived too deeply into it. And I actually don't know that I will. It's just nice to know that you can take it this far if you want to. If I was ever just sort of setting an adventure or full campaign on Alekvadin for any reason, I probably would use these methods to further define it, but I just probably won't ever play too long term in Alekvadin to go this far. The law level here is B. That value is 11. So the law level 11 here represents a highly restrictive, heavily monitored, and oppressive legal environment. The core, the core rulebook basically just, at a certain level, I think it's 9 plus. It's just all weapons and armor are banned, and it doesn't really give you a lot else to play with. But the World Builder's Handbook helps a lot, and so we'll go through some of these restrictions that I've come up with. Obviously, weapons and armor aggressively enforces bans by conducting, but there are basically no rights here, as we'll get into. Government aggressively enforces bans by conducting random sweeps for weapons violations. The economic law is to maintain strict control over commerce. Authorities engage in continuous auditing of all financial transactions. The legal system allows authorities to carry out arbitrary and indefinite detention of any individuals that are suspected. Civil disputes are done by arbitrary government adjudication, and the government mandates approval for all private contracts. So you can't have agreements just privately among citizens. The government oversees all of that. Citizens enjoy virtually no privacy. They're subject to warrantless searches, total government control of information, and routine surveillance of all private activities. The judicial system and punishments, because the law level B falls into that A+ threshold, it applies a -4 dice modifier when generating the world's legal framework, heavily skewing the justice system toward an inquisitorial model where judges determine guilt without adversarial trials. The numeric law level is applied as a negative modifier to the presumption of innocence roll. So you get a DM -11 for a B rating. This makes it almost mathematically certain that the accused are presumed guilty in the eyes of the law. And because the law level is 9 or above, it applies a +4 dice modifier to the determination roll of whether or not there's a death penalty, which makes it highly probable that the death penalty is actively used here on Alekvadin. Law enforcement and culture. Law level in the 9 to B range provides a +2 dice modifier to the size and effect of the world's enforcement branch, ensuring a strong presence of armed law enforcement or paramilitary internal security. So that is existing here. Cultural shifts. This extreme level of control directly shapes the world's culture profile by applying a -1 dice modifier to progressiveness, making the society more conservative or reactionary, and a +1 dice modifier to its militancy, which is probably why they really support this kind of charismatic dictator ruling over everything with an iron fist, but with the overwhelming confidence of the population, as it says. Economic impacts, economic efficiency, the stifling bureaucracy and regulation of an A+ law level applies a -1 dice modifier to the world's efficiency factor, which negatively impacts the gross world domestic product and overall wealth, which is probably why it's not a rich planet. No, I'm just kidding. Inequality, strict laws of 9+ increase a world's inequality rating by the law level -8. For a law level of 11, this means a +3 dice modifier to inequality rating, resulting in a wider gap between the wealthy elites and the general population. Well, surprise, surprise. Trade tariffs. Worlds with law levels of 9+ apply a +2 dice modifier to tariff rates, increasing the likelihood of high or extreme taxes being levied on all imported goods. So, just some interesting food for thought there as you kind of think about how you can flesh a world like this out, and tools available to you as you're doing your own UWP evaluation. I highly, highly, highly recommend checking out the World Builder's Handbook. Even if, like me, you can't stand math, I promise, spend an afternoon with it and it kind of starts making sense. And you can also look online, ask for help on forums. There's a ton of assistance out there available to you if you are not mathematically inclined, I promise you. And then finally, tech level E, highly advanced, tech level 14, which is right in line with the high-tech trade code. And like we've already sort of talked about, no-brainer here, Alekvadin is one of the most technologically advanced planets in charted space and the core sector, and is one of the, one of the sector's biggest producers of the technology that we've been talking about all along here on today's episode. I hope you've enjoyed this System Spotlight. Okay, now it's time for an adventure review. As promised, we're taking a look at Core Adventure number 1, Invasive Species by Christopher Griffen, which when we get into it, I'm sure you will see the reasons why I chose this episode and this adventure for a first module review, not counting the review of Singularity we did a few episodes ago. That kind of turned into its own thing. This is a tried and true adventure review, which I'm sure there will be more of in the future. There will at least be 2 more, because I plan to also review the other 2 in the series. So from the tin, the back of the book, I'll read this and then we'll get into the review. The core is the seat of empire for the Third Imperium, a highly populated and industrialized region of space civilized for thousands of years. It is also home to several reserve worlds, some of which are places where the imperial feudal nobility go to rest and play. Tenea Faber is a candidate to become the 4th reserve world in the sector, hosting a lush ecosphere with dozens of imported alien animals. The travelers are hired by the ducal heir of Alekvadin to fly a safari ship first to Akasanya to obtain specimens of a rare and wild species, and then to Tenea Faber, where the animal is to be deposited into a wildlife preserve. After it is settled in, the young Duke-to-be enlists the travelers to hunt the elusive creature in its adopted habitat, but it proves to be a wily prey with heretofore unknown abilities. The hunters become the hunted and are seemingly forced to fight off the entire animal kingdom of the preserve. They will end up in a pitched battle for their very survival. So right there, the primary objective for the travelers is to transport the superb Starling, which is a luxurious Type K safari ship, heavily customized, from Sirma to Akasanya, capture the live specimen of that creature called the Shaku Zarpi, and then transport the specimens to the wildlife preserve on Tenea Faber, where they're going to take part in that exclusive paleo hunt. What is that? Well, we'll get into it in a second. This is all set up at the behest of Arvanin Elios Okhotnikov, the demanding and fastidious ducal heir of Alekvadin. So he's the son of the Duke that we talked about when we looked at Alekvadin in our System Spotlight. Though the initial contact and the negotiations are handled by Okhotnikov's ambitious chamberlain, Ivy Golba. Okhotnikov is an exacting taskmaster who expects absolute perfection and deference, and who considers himself a visionary interstellar game hunter. For her part, Golba is a 31-year-old Villani female, and she's relatively new to her position as Chamberlain. She's served the ducal family for just over a year. However, it's said that she's taken to the job well and is characterized as highly ambitious. And because the current Duke's Chamberlain is retiring soon, she's confident in her ability to quickly ascend the administrative ranks of House Okhotnikov and has her sights set on that main position of the Duke's Chamberlain, not just the ducal heir's Chamberlain. So referees can keep that in mind as something to play with. While she's loyal to her employer, she's also well aware of how difficult Okhotnikov can be to work with. And if tensions flare between him and the travelers, she will do her best to act as an arbitrator to smooth things over. She's also pragmatic enough that the travelers can potentially persuade her to help them do some things, right? So she could be sort of an ally, provided they can convince her that being on their side and doing the things they want her to do. I'm trying to be slightly non-spoilery, although just spoiler alert, there's probably going to be some details in this that if you're a player, you wouldn't really want to know, or a referee wouldn't want you to know. So just caveat emptor on that. Although the back of the book honestly gives a ton of stuff away that I wouldn't if it were me, but it is what it is, right? Point being, there are some kind of twists and turns along the way, which I'll explain a little bit better in a minute. But the book also has some other interesting NPCs to play with as well, beyond the patron and Ivy. You get Dunka Gunky, who we've talked about before. He's the celebrity host of the Villani hunting and cooking show, Shugili Shimikirki. I can never pronounce it, but we've talked about him a couple of times before, including our Anshel Dravane episode. So he features heavily in this and acts as a direct competitor for the Shakuzarpi on Akusanya, and can be charmed into being an ally of the traveler as well. And we have Tilaniti Kearney, the chief preserve ranger on Tanea Faber, who secretly disapproves of Okhotnikov's reckless wildlife management philosophy. And he knows that, dropping an alien species into preserve is likely to end in disaster. So, she's a little more with it, right? Real Dunknever is Okhotnikov's gregarious personal steward and chef who provides excellent meals, processes the traveler's game, and offers a sympathetic ear to the stressed crew for just dealing with this asshole. It's the adventure structure is really interesting. They'll face the crew will face numerous challenges that require diverse problem-solving skills. So, again, without getting into too much spoiler territory, there's a maintenance dilemma happening where the gist is the superb starling is overdue for maintenance, and the travelers will have some decisions to make with timing, I guess is all I'll say. Obviously, there are going to be environmental hazards to deal with in an adventure like this in the outdoors, especially as they're on Akusanya initially hunting the creature. And then hopefully it's not a spoiler to say transporting this thing from point A to point Z, its ultimate destination, is probably not something that you're going to hand wave, right? There's likely going to be some potential for disaster and challenge and obstacles in there as well. Why would players like this? Highly incentivized by the payout, which includes really good salaries and a bonus of up to 500,000 credits, 500,000 credits. And, if they do well, they're going to get this ducal heir, powerful contact in the core, which is always something that you have to take into consideration. Building contacts, especially among the rich and powerful and influential. Mechanically, it's going to appeal to players who enjoy utilizing a broad portfolio of non-combat skills. Right? There's opportunities for piloting, engineering, animals, veterinary, stealth, survival. There's a whole host of skills that could come into play here beyond the typical traveler skills, gun combat, and things of that nature. So interesting there. Referees would enjoy running this adventure because it offers a lot of player agency from the very start, with a lot of what I call kind of no perfect answer dilemmas that you just have to contend with and deal with. That will have a ripple effect throughout the narrative, depending on which way the traveler goes. Again, I'm trying to be a little respectful here to not spoil the whole thing, but right up front, you got some decisions to make that will, one way or another, have a little bit of a domino effect that I found very interesting, very intriguing, very fun. Then you've got hostile environments that make, the wilderness itself an antagonist, which gives the referees a real entertaining sort of arena to play in. And not to mention, having a demanding patron to role play is just fun. Like, just Okhotnikov is such a douche, and you could just really play him that way and have a lot of fun with it, and just be exasperating and push your travelers to the limit, to whatever degree you feel like they would be entertained by, right up to the point of being annoying, where they just really have to deal with this jerk. I find it a lot of fun and a refreshing kind of departure from run and gun. Obviously it's outside of the norm of published traveler adventures, and I just sort of love it in that way. My bottom line here for Invasive Species is it's a fantastic adventure for the core, because it perfectly captures the staggering wealth and eccentricities and this sort of notion of artificial danger sought by the core's elite, and shifts, like I said, that standard traveler experience from gritty mercenary trading work into the more high society eccentricities of the elite, and sends them on a sci-fi safari lark, kind of, and shines a spotlight on the types of leisure activities and indulgences of the idle rich that we've been talking about on today's episode, which is just, it made it perfect to, I know this episode is really long, but I really wanted to fit this review in because it just so perfectly fit with the theme of today's episode. So thank you for sticking with it. It has a lot going for it. You got the planetary scale playground with Tanea Faber as this lush candidate for an Imperial Reserve world, but that the Dukes of Alekvadin have used as a private resort for centuries. And that just perfectly illustrates that this unfathomable resources at play in the core, where nobility can just waste money on entertainment and just have this planet that's just their own little sandbox. I think that there's a great little element here to work with. The patron is a classic dilettante with delusions of grandeur. He lacks the academic dedication to become a real zoologist, and just uses his immense family wealth to play at being this self-described visionary interstellar game hunter, and just insists that the travelers engage in this paleo hunt at the end where he forces them to give up all communication devices, and you have to ride livestock, basically horses, through the wilderness, because he craves the romanticized aesthetic of doing things the hard way. So, they have to do it rustic, paleo. That's what the paleo hunt is. You'd have to do it old style, which I just think is just what a great note. What a great note of that great little element there. And of course, more underpinnings of this, what I call absurd luxury. So the superb starling itself is owned by a baroness who lends it out just because her family has become too urbane for it, right? They're just kind of outgrown it. So she lends it out, and this thing is like the ultimate glamping vessel. It features a bridge styled like a posh tiki lounge, and it kind of combines a hunting lodge, dining hall. It's got it comes with a dedicated personal steward who serves those gourmet meals that we talked about, fine whiskeys, even while the ship comes with its own sort of unique challenges that the travelers have to contend with too. Through it all, you've got that whole notion of celebrity culture and vain pursuits to play with, right? The core's leisure economy is brilliantly sort of fleshed out here. And I love that it includes Dunka Gunky, this massive celebrity host of that show, his holo-vid hunting and cooking show, who initially competes with the travelers for the same game, but is a potential ally as well. And it just is another example or a good illustration of that of how extreme hunting is a massive spectator sport here as well. So just a prime example of some of the things that we were talking about all throughout this episode. And then you've got the high stakes social climbing, right? So for referees, it provides them with a brilliant way to run a campaign driven by social survival, where the true challenge is as much about catering to this haughty, arrogant noble who treats the galaxy like his sandbox and playground as it is surviving the alien wildlife. It's not necessarily the danger of the species as much as it is the challenge of just dealing with this guy and making him happy and finishing this job. And not dying. So there's just a lot to play with here. It's a great adventure. I really do recommend it for people wanting to dabble in the core. I think it takes a lot of the elements that we've been talking about here and perfectly encapsulates them. And you should check it out if you're looking for a starting spot or a starting way to dip your toe into core sector play. Because if the travelers can manage this monumental babysitting job, they can set themselves up for future opportunities among the core sector elite and kind of punch themselves a ticket to luxury. Hey, thanks for bearing with us on this extra lengthy episode. I don't even know how long this episode is going to end up being with the segments that I've recorded, but I know it's going to be extra long, and I appreciate you sticking with it. Hopefully there was enough here for you to be entertained by and to think about, food for thought with running adventures in the core. I'm not really sure what the next episode will be yet. I've got a lot of different ideas kicking around, some of which I've talked about before. It may bring to life. Hopefully my print copies of Singularity will arrive by the time the next episode is out, and I can get into some more hands-on exploration of some of the routes involved there, sort of taking that tour of the core concept and a little bit like today's episode was, sort of a zine format where we'll do a few more system spotlights, adventure seeds, develop some patrons, all with the notion of hypothetical, hey, okay, we're on one of the routes of Singularity. We're on a tour. We're doing the Villani Spur, for instance. So we're on a tour there. Who would be some patrons and passengers to deal with? What would some of the adventure hooks be? What would they do on a port of call on a planet along the way? Let's look at that planet. Those are sort of some of the ideas that I'm talking about. Just I had some folks ask questions. What do I mean about like that zine format? What would change about the format of the show? That's sort of what I'm thinking, is similarly along the lines of what today felt like, but maybe a little less rabbit holey and rambly in some areas. I just had a lot on my mind to think about in this episode. I needed to get it out. So thank you for being a sounding board and listening to that. And let me know what you think. Always open to feedback. Write the show at coresignalsmail@gmail.com or follow along on Blue Sky at signalsfromthecore.bsky.social. You can find this info in our show notes along with a link tree to make it easy to locate the show online anytime at the email, the Blue Sky. I've got an Instagram. I've got a YouTube for folks who like to listen to their podcasts on YouTube and not Spotify or Apple Podcasts, although those are on the link tree too. So trying to make it easy to find the show wherever you like to listen to or consume your content or follow folks on social. So go ahead. I would appreciate the follow there. And if you enjoyed the show, please, as always, rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Just give a review, hit the rating for me, and share the show with your fellow travelers. It really helps me out a lot, and I appreciate it so much from the bottom of my heart to everybody who has already reviewed the show and rated the show. Appreciate you so much. Everyone who emails or drops me notes on social, love interacting and exchanging notes. So thank you so much there. Until next time, keep your clearance valid, your comms encrypted, and your grav line out of committee oversight. Stay sharp, travelers.